Afternoon. Today we're looking at Psalm chapter 31, and the psalm deals with false accusation. Notice Psalm chapter 31 and verse number 13. David said, "For I've heard of the slander of many, fear on every side, while they took, that is, his enemies, took counsel together against me. They devised to take away my life." Now, then, in verse 18, David said, "Let the lying lips." Remember that David is praying to God and he's telling God what's occurring in his life. And in a moment, I want to show you just how it was affecting him. But again, let the lying lips, the lies and the falsehood be put to silence, he's asking God, which speak grievous things. Slander can be such a grievous, hateful, malicious thing, and they speak it proudly, arrogantly, and contemptuously against the righteous. Now, I don't know, but have you ever been falsely accused? I mean, you've been innocent, you haven't done anything wrong, you were right, and you are dealing with something that is actually affecting your life in a horrible way. And I was just reading in an article about a young man that was in a college that was falsely accused of rape. This woman had accused him of raping her at a certain party. He lost his scholarship. He was dismissed from the football team. The school had kicked him out. And then later, this young lady had confessed that she was lying, that it never happened, it never occurred. And the only reason she said that about him was to get the attention of some other fella. What's interesting, though, is when he was asked in this article, what did the school do? He said, when this happened, they didn't do anything. They didn't even ask me if it was true. They just dismissed me, and now he lost everything. And you know what the irony of all that is? The school hasn't done anything. They didn't give back his scholarship. He's not been readmitted to the school. You see, sometimes when people slander you, we see it in politics all the time, that the bridges are burnt, the damage is done, and all that's left is pretty near nothing. And so slander and false accusation can be just a horrible thing, and that just underscores what's happening in our culture today. We are becoming a culture and a society that is hypercritical. You cannot watch the news or get on social media, at least for some, where they are so critical and judgmental against everybody. Oh, look at how our world is becoming. It's becoming just such a challenging place to live in sometimes. So what's happening in the Psalm 31, is David has been falsely accused. Now, sometimes you hear people say, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me," and that's never been true. And notice what David says as you read let's begin in verse number 9. I'm going to read it very quickly, but notice this. "Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am in trouble. Mine eyes are consumed with grief." Boy, it's really affecting him, isn't it? Notice in verse 10, "My life is spent in grief. My strength is failing." Verse number 11, he says, "I become a reproach." Think about just because what people have lied about you, it ruins your reputation, that you become a reproach among the enemies, and even my neighbors, David said, and they even fear my acquaintance, and they don't want to be seen with me. That's why he says in the latter part, they flee or fled from me. Notice verse number 12. Just think about how destroying false accusation can be. It ought not to ever be coming from our lips. We ought never ever to falsely accuse somebody or embellish the truth or lie about somebody. We ought to be thinking about what it can do to that somebody. And I'll tell you what it does to us too. Now, verse number 12, he says, "I'm forgotten as a dead man, out of mind. I'm like a broken vessel." Then verse number 13, again, "I am slandered of the many." Now, it's interesting, I think, is how do you deal with this? I mean, notice that he'll go to God in prayer about this, about being falsely accused, and he's declaring he's innocent. He hadn't done anything. And I have been saying all along, and I hope you're getting it by now, that that you can go to God about anything. You can pour out your heart, and we see it all the way through the Psalms. His prayer is real. It's not some pious pablum or ritual prayer for performance. He's praying what his heart is feeling, and he pours that out to God. Now, notice this. He's going to say a couple of things here that I think that can help us. Now, notice in verse number 1, "O thee, O Lord, do I put in my trust." In other words, he's entrusting himself to God. He's appealing to God. Notice he's turning to God about all of this. And then he said, "Let me never be ashamed." In other words, he doesn't want to fail in spite of what those folks are saying. And then in thy righteousness. Now, the key verse on this is verse number 5, and this is what I want you to think about today. And that is, he'll say, "Into thy hand I commit my spirit." Does that sound familiar to you? You remember someone else had said that at the cross? In other words, when you commit your spirit to somebody, you are entrusting yourself to that person. You're just not committing, but you are entrusting yourself. And boy, that's a challenging thing to do almost about in any aspect of life. Think about it. You entrust your investments, don't you, to somebody? You let them have control over them. And what we're talking about here is that with all the things that are going on in his life and all the troubles that he faces, in particular here, the false accusations and slander, you notice that he goes to God and he's saying, "God, I am committing my spirit to you." He's not talking about death. He's talking about he's trusting this whole business. I'm trusting my life to you, and I'm going to let you handle all of this. Boy, that's difficult to do, isn't it? Sometimes we want to take it upon ourselves. Now, we need to be wise about this. I mean, there's a whole lot of things we can say about when you're criticized and you're falsely slandered. There's reasons why people do it. Sometimes they do it to get an advantage over you. Sometimes people are just hateful and malicious. If you notice in that verse we read just a little earlier, in verse 18, that they slander and they criticize and speak grievous things about the righteous. And the more secular society comes, the more it's slighted against religion and against God. You're going to see a whole bunch of this that's going on. If you stand up for principles and what God says, I can guarantee you're going to be slandered in some way. It's amazing how people can get on social media and just slander people. It's so malicious, and most of the time it's untrue. And so here's what David is saying. This has affected me deeply. It's hurt me, and now I'm going to commit my spirit and trust it to you. I'm going to let God handle that. And I want you to understand that's not easy, and it's challenging, and it's a matter of faith, isn't it? Now, notice this. If you don't do it that way, and we're not talking about everything we could today, but if you don't go to that first, that you tell God what's going on and how it's hurt you deeply and how you're struggling with it and what the folks are saying and how it's ruining things, you got to go to God and trust that whole business to him. Now, notice though, if you don't do that, if you just go to God in prayer and you're not really entrusting anything to him, you're just telling God what's going on and then you just say amen. But if you go that way and you don't entrust it to God and you just tell God about what's happening, and I don't even know if everybody does that sometimes, but at any rate, if you do that, and then if you say, well, I'm going to see if God's going to do anything, I don't know if he's going to do anything at all, and I want to see how he does it, and if he doesn't do it, then what we do is we take the matters into our own hands, don't we? That's what we do. And we begin, I think, when we pray like that and we really don't expect God to do anything and we really haven't entrusted it to him. Can I say it again? When we really haven't entrusted him and entrusted something to him ourselves, then we're going to come up with some unhealthy conclusions. Did you catch that? If you're really not entrusting it to God and it's just sort of a pious prayer and you don't really mean it and you're not going to let God handle this, then you see we're going to make some unhealthy conclusions. We'll quit praying. We won't trust God. We won't entrust anything to him. And then I want you to understand something else. While you're making unhealthy conclusions about God and we certainly don't want to do that. God is also forming a conclusion about us. Think about that. So in the prayer today, it's challenging, and I think that if you ever do anything, if you're not just sitting in a corner or hiding under the bed and you're actually out doing something, you can guarantee that you're going to be criticized for it. It's just impossible, because offenses will come, Jesus said, and the more you stick your neck out, the more you're going to be criticized. That's just the way it is. And there's people out there that are going to criticize just because they're malicious and hateful people. They're just going to do that. And so you got to learn how to deal with it. I'm just suggesting today, just in a very simple, fundamental way, you go to God to that. You entrust whatever's going on in your life to Him. You let God handle it on His time, and He'll take care of that. And then that's the only way that you can really be at peace and you can at rest, because when you try to handle all these things by yourself, you're alone, and usually that doesn't work out too well. So it's a great psalm. We're learning so much in the Psalms, aren't we, that we can go to God in prayer, pour out our emotions, let Him handle it, and then that can give us peace because we put it in the hands of someone who can really deal with it. So that's the lesson today, and we'll see you tomorrow in Psalm 32, and that's a challenging psalm. I hope you read it before you get with me tomorrow, and it'll give you some help as we study it together.